ating webinar for tonight. Yes. Um, Let me start when the pandemic actually hit us, no? And that's well early this year, but we came to actually the enhanced community quarantine by March. When that happened, there was no doubt in the mind of the Department of Education under the leadership of our Secretary, Leonor Magtolis Briones, that education must continue, okay? Despite the fact that there was a pandemic, um, that actually there was suspension of classes, and that it continues today. We have been doing this, in fact, kahit nung wala pa pong pandemya, no? We are hit by disasters arising from natural and human-induced hazards, no? And we have been doing this, no, learning continuity amidst disasters. And so the secretary was clear, and all of us in the Department of Education, no, we're actually clear that we will push through with the opening of classes. Of course, given the circumstances that the impact of the pandemic has been increasing, you know, we have increasing number of cases, that the opening has been actually pushed back. Okay? So, bakit nga ba natin ipinagpapatuloy? No? There are arguments, both arguments for and arguments against, and our speakers have underscored them. No? But the department is also aware of the various studies, no? Stating na, you know, with the disruption of classes, and if we do not open classes, we do not continue the education of our learners, there are dire consequences, both in terms of the loss of learning, and that's significant, as well as on the mental health of our children. And so choices have to be made. In fact, in the midst of disasters, we actually, you know, do response, no, measures, and we have always asserted that learning continuity amidst disasters or emergencies is both life-saving and life-sustaining. Okay? So let me work on that as the premise of the education department actually asserting that education must continue. We provide the learning opportunities for our students in the midst of the pandemic. Now, the speakers have also underscored, you know, the difficulties, the challenges faced by our students, our learners, our parents, and our teachers themselves. A study has in fact been initiated by UNICEF and DepEd, no? And this study is a quantitative study on the education needs under extraordinary circumstances, and we refer to the various, you know, situations that have been already shared by the speakers on those difficult circumstances that are actually arising from this COVID-19 pandemic. In those studies, let me share with you a number of results. And let me start with the students. Okay? Doon po sa mga estudyante, no? One of the difficulties that they face is in fact yung slow internet connection for various reasons. The fact na walang pera pangkabit ng internet, hirap sa kung ano pagpapaload, kung data man ang gamitin nila. Wala ring enough gadget. Slow internet connection din dahil mismo sa infrastructure, no? And then meron din yung walang-wala talagang gadget, maliban sa not enough, okay? And of course, meron mga areas talaga tayo na walang internet connection. And we understand the situation even before the study actually has been conducted. And therefore, in the planning of the department, you know, early on, we saw that the way to go is to actually shift, no? Of course, wala naman talaga pong face-to-face learning, no? But to shift, no? As students or learners are actually at home, on what we call the blended learning. And Dr. Concepcion has actually, I think, no, comprehensively discussed yung blended learning ng DepEd. So that we have offered, of course, the use of online learning for those who have the access to connection. And that's yung online learning na natin ay isa sa mga mode natin, modalities, called it the learning modalities. The other one, of course, is the use of self-learning modules. The self-learning modules are not new. Some people think they are new. They used to call them as alternative delivery modes during disasters. Okay. What is now, what has happened is actually to align them to the K-12 curriculum. Okay? And then we also have doon sa mga walang connection at hirap talaga, yung the use of TV and of course the use of radio. So may apat po. Hindi siya either or, no? Because in fact, one of the problems in using online is yung screen hours ng mga bata, and therefore that's why blended is also, you know, a combination of 2 or 3 of the modalities. Okay? So given the problems of the students, the parents, that is the approach that the DepEd actually has taken, okay, para po may pagpatuloy ang pag-aaral ng ating mga mag-aaral. Now, when it comes to parents, and this is where I guess, you know, mental health for students also is multi-layered, no? They underscored also mental health as one of their concerns, actually. Okay? And dito pumapasok yung buong dynamics, no? Of the shift that we actually have, that we are all into, no? Because no one is spared at this point. Okay? And for the parents, in fact, no, yung matingkad din sa kanila ay yung depression, anxiety due to the uncertain future. And this is also, you know, coupled with yung loss of jobs, the juggling of work, as you said so, okay? And so many of them are actually still adjusting. Mas marami pa po ang adjusting kaysa naka-adjust na. And many are also struggling to adjust at this point. When it comes also to the teachers, ang mental health isa rin sa concern nila yon, no? And also, of course, no, yun din kanilang adjustment doon sa mga modalities. Because in fact, no, for the teachers, no, hindi lang yung slow internet connection din, pati sa kanila, may lack of gadget din, at saka sa kanila yung lack of training. No? And then yung hindi sila sanay, no, they're not used to actually facing the camera and teaching, no? As, talagang bago, no? New sa kanila yung ganito na interaction. And so these things actually have led us also with mental health as another major concern. The department also have launched a number of mental health and psychosocial programs. No? Sa loob po ng isang linggo, araw-araw, no, on a daily basis, we actually have various programs, limited at this point in the sense that they are online. Okay, by the second week, before the week before the opening of classes, we will be having a number of televised editions of those online versions actually, to reach out to more students, as well as we have also a number of self-learning psychosocial materials that are provided to students and to parents as well. So department is doing the best it can, okay, to address not only the learning continuity of students via the curriculum, okay, but as well as helping the students with their and parents and teachers with their mental health concerns, because our mental health and psychosocial problems actually include the parents and the teachers. Okay? Now, I'd like to go into something I think has actually led us to this challenge. And this is the way we have actually, it is the paradigm of education that we have, and it is the way we look at the learning, okay? Because primarily the Philippines mode of learning is individual but hierarchical in a sense, no? Sa modes of learning, no, in the different learning framework, no, learning modes, no, iba-iba po kasi yun. And sa Pilipinas, ang atin ay medyo yung individual and hierarchical, meaning that learning, the way we understand learning is that it is the locus of learning is in the school. Ba? So napaka-school focused ng learning natin. And it is facilitated, led by a teacher. And therefore, when this COVID-19 happened, yung buong paradigm of learning natin has been challenged kasi ibang-iba yung sitwasyon. There are a number of countries, though not widespread, no? Yung iba pang other modes of learning. Kaya nga nabanggit ng isang speaker, no? Yung homeschooling, for instance, that's a different kind of learning framework. That learning framework is individual, yes, but it is not hierarchical. It is distributed, meaning that the student actually learns from various sources. The school is not the locus of learning alone. Okay? There are various sa kanya, pinanggagalingan ng learning niya. And there are still other modes, no? Meron tayong mga collective, no, distributed na mga modes of learning, no? And that's where we can see yung mga learning communities kung saan may mga peer-to-peer tutorials. You can be the teacher, the student can be a tutor and can be a learner also. So iba-iba po siya, or those who actually see networks as a form of learning. So the photographers who come together and they learn from one another is a different form of learning. Sa ibang bansa, nangyayari siya. Okay? Pero hindi siya yung hindi siya kasi primary mode of learning natin. Okay? Kaya ang lakas ng disruption sa atin. No? And of course, that's why the question for us, I think, no, while kasi inaano natin, may shift ng from the teacher, no, from the individual hierarchical, model of learning to shifting to parents is such a huge challenge, no? Poses really a challenge on capacities and even mental health concerns. Now, in the long run, while we adjust, sabi nga namin, well, and I think everyone will agree, we cannot be paralyzed by this COVID-19. we have to proceed with the best that we can, given the analysis of the situation. We all have the policies in place. If you ask us on mga minimum health care standards, required health standards, they are in place. Of course, I would not say that the entire needs are actually met in terms of budget and everything. So we have limited budget as well. But there are, of course, efforts to expand the budget by official means through the appropriations of the government, as well as through the partners. But I think the more important question from my end, personally speaking, is when you talk of this pandemic as the impacts of it, okay, and the way of life that we have will be the new normal. It's not gonna go back to the way it was, to the normal that we have defined, but rather that it will actually shape into something we call a new normal. The challenge now is to actually shift our understanding of learning. What is important to learn? What do we need to learn? Okay, because this will also define what are we measuring. Kasi ang mini-measure natin, di ba, ngayon, di ba? So may mga exams tayo, may mga, di ba? Depende siya sa competencies required on a grade level. Homeschools will not do that, but rather the learning parameters are actually defined of what the students want to learn, okay, that are useful for the students. Kaya nga sila gumagawa ng sarili nilang mga curriculum, di ba? And also different for those who are actually yung tinatawag nilang distributed collective learning model. Iba din po yun. Depende sa ano yung collective values ng isang community, okay? And how do they actually come together and learn from there, something that's useful for something broader rather than just for individual achievements or having a job. So the challenge is to actually look into that. What is worth learning? Who defines that? How is that defined? What is the place of both the individual and society in defining that? Okay. What values do we hold and would like to uphold? Where do we learn those? Because sabi ko nga, sa ibang bansa nangyari naman siya. Medyo hindi pa sa natin, pero may mga naman din tayo. May mga ilan-ilan, May mga distance learning ka naman, But the reality is that more and more we realize also that content is not with the teacher alone. We now shift to the parents. Pero takot natin nga, ano nga ba ang Kasi nga, ang tingin natin, yung kailangan matutunan ng bata, yung yung nandoon sa learning competencies na nakadefine at lahat, di ba? So ang hirap ng shifting, ng burden na yon, hindi po ba? Diba? And of course, how do we learn? So yung sabihin mo, sources of learning, where do you actually learn? There's so many things. May mga tinatawag na networks as actually sources of learning, as locus of learning. Not only digital, but also networks. Yun ding, where is the expertise? Ang tanong natin dyan, di ba? Ang tingin natin, yung guro. But I've always, doon sa climate change projects namin, I always tell my staff, I need an interaction between the communities and the students. The projects of the students is something useful to communities. Why don't you make the farmers teach the students how climate change is actually manifested in farming, everything? But we don't look at the farmers as teachers, right? It's not natural for us. But all this, if you look at what could be learned from one another, you realize that the teachers, the sources of learning, are not only within the confines of the classroom. And how do we want to learn? Okay, and therefore, looking at that, okay, in the long run, as we try to put in place what we can at the moment within the framework still of the learning paradigm that we have, having, of course, yung anong dapat matutunan per grade level at lahat, ganun. How do we measure all this with a different locus of not only the teachers now, but adding the parents. But we need to look in the long run, actually, how education or learning in itself can be shifting. And this is where, if our students are actually from home, what learning can actually be facilitated by parents that are actually revolving around tasks in life, okay, or skills in life, or even understanding life itself versus just content, or interfacing it with content. And how do the parents come into that? I think these are the things that we need to be looking into. Okay, is the interface of learning, as we always say, it is for life rather than just for getting work or for achieving some grades or measuring the competencies, okay, that are actually assigned to grade levels. I think the challenge is that. And so I would like to end there, because a number of the things you have already mentioned, the speakers have mentioned, are actually in place in the department. But I think there's a greater challenge to actually look at learning as a whole and to actually take a shift from the way we understand education and learning. It is said that, the changes which actually other countries have been already implementing even way back, okay? The question is not actually, all these transformations that are happening, they're happening in a very unprecedented speed. The question is not actually whether these transformations, as I said, will happen, they're happening. The COVID-19 is compelling us, in fact, to actually look at all this paradigm, and probably compel us to a paradigm shift. The question is how fast these shifts will be happening, okay? How quickly and efficiently ideas on how to organize learning are able to adapt to the changes that are happening right now. And it is better that we actually take a look at them now rather than get pushed, and react, and we keep reacting on matters, So the challenge for us is to sit down and take the choice. Within this pandemic, there is a choice. And the choice is in our hands. But they are actually difficult choices. Yes, they are. But they also are choices that require a shift in the way we understand how learning takes place and what is important learning for all of us. With that, a pleasant evening po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Director Ko.